Have you ever wondered how some people in their 90s can still prepare their own meals, walk every day without assistance, and show blood sugar and inflammation levels closer to someone in their 60s? In Okinawa, Japan, this is not unusual. Medical researchers studying aging in this region consistently observed something that challenged common assumptions about growing older. These men and women were not following strict diets, counting calories, or relying on supplements. In fact, many of them were eating the same type of meals they had eaten for most of their adult lives. What drew attention was not how much food was on their plate, but what that plate was made of. When doctors began comparing metabolic markers such as insulin sensitivity, muscle preservation, and inflammatory indicators, the differences were clear. Older adults in Okinawa showed patterns associated with healthy aging and lower risk of chronic disease, even after age 90. This raised an important question in preventive medicine. If genetics alone cannot explain this level of resilience, what daily habits are protecting their bodies over time? The answer pointed back to food, not as a short-term intervention, but as a lifelong routine repeated thousands of times. This is where the Okinawa Plate becomes important. It is not a trend, a cleanse, or a modern interpretation of the Japanese diet. It is a simple, structured way of eating that has remained largely unchanged for generations. Researchers studying Japanese longevity found that elders were not overeating, but they were also not undernourished. Their meals consistently supported stable blood sugar, low chronic inflammation, and the preservation of muscle mass, which is critical for aging after 50. These outcomes are strongly linked to lower rates of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and mobility loss. What surprises many Western doctors is how unremarkable these meals appear at first glance. There is no focus on protein loading, no avoidance of entire food groups, and no dependence on packaged health products. Instead, the Okinawa Plate follows a predictable structure that prioritizes vegetables, slow-digesting carbohydrates, modest protein, and controlled portions. This structure creates a metabolic environment that supports disease prevention rather than reacting to illness once it appears. It is important to be clear about what this is not. This is not a miracle plan, and it is not the result of rare genetics unique to one island. When Okinawan elders moved to other countries and abandoned their traditional eating patterns, their health outcomes began to resemble those of the local population. This strongly suggests that lifestyle, not ancestry, is the driving factor. Japanese longevity studies repeatedly show that consistency matters more than intensity. Small, repeatable choices made daily for decades shape how the body ages. If you are interested in healthy aging, this matters because the same biological processes affected by the Okinawa Plate, insulin control, inflammation, muscle maintenance, are the same ones that begin to decline quietly in midlife. Aging after 50 is not defined by one event, but by cumulative stress on the body. The Japanese diet, as practiced traditionally in Okinawa, reduces that stress through simplicity and balance rather than restriction. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because the foundation of this approach is not complexity, but clarity. In the next part, we will begin breaking down the first of the three core foods that make up the Okinawa Plate, and why it plays such a critical role in long-term health. Before we look at individual foods, it helps to understand how Okinawan elders think about meals. Food is not used to chase quick results or compensate for poor habits elsewhere in the day. It is used to maintain stability. Meals are prepared in similar ways, at similar times, using familiar ingredients. This repetition matters because the body responds best to predictable inputs, especially as we age. Irregular eating patterns and highly processed foods place repeated stress on blood sugar regulation, digestion, and inflammation control. Over decades, that stress accumulates. In Okinawa, meals are built to avoid that cycle. Elders are not eating until they are full in the Western sense. They stop when hunger is satisfied, which reduces insulin spikes and digestive overload. From a medical perspective, this supports long-term metabolic efficiency and lowers the risk of developing insulin resistance. This is one of the reasons Japanese longevity research consistently shows lower rates of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease in older adults who maintain traditional eating patterns. Another important observation is how little variety exists from day to day. While this may sound limiting, it allows the body to adapt efficiently. Digestive enzymes, gut bacteria, and hormonal responses remain stable when meals follow a consistent structure. This stability is especially important for aging after 50, when recovery slows and the margin for error becomes smaller. Rather than relying on willpower or complex planning, the Okinawa Plate removes decision fatigue by keeping meals simple and familiar. At this point, it may be useful to pause and reflect on your own routine. How often do your meals change dramatically from one day to the next? Do you notice differences in how you feel when your eating schedule is consistent versus irregular? These observations can be valuable, and many people find it helpful to share what they've noticed about their own food habits and energy levels. As Japanese medicine has emphasized for decades, prevention works best when it is quiet and uneventful. There is no need for extreme restriction or constant adjustment. The Okinawa Plate supports healthy aging precisely because it does not demand attention once it becomes routine. If this approach aligns with how you prefer to think about food and disease prevention, you may naturally find yourself paying closer attention to how your own meals are structured. In the next part, we will begin examining the first key food on the Okinawa Plate, including how it affects blood sugar, inflammation, and muscle preservation, and why it appears so consistently in the diets of Okinawan elders. Before we look at individual foods, it helps to understand how Okinawan elders think about meals. Food is not used to chase quick results or compensate for poor habits elsewhere in the day. It is used to maintain stability. Meals are prepared in similar ways, at similar times, using familiar ingredients. This repetition matters because the body responds best to predictable inputs, especially as we age. Irregular eating patterns and highly processed foods place repeated stress on blood sugar regulation, digestion, and inflammation control. Over decades, that stress accumulates. In Okinawa, meals are built to avoid that cycle. Elders are not eating until they are full in the Western sense. They stop when hunger is satisfied, which reduces insulin spikes and digestive overload. From a medical perspective, this supports long-term metabolic efficiency and lowers the risk of developing insulin resistance. This is one of the reasons Japanese longevity research consistently shows lower rates of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease in older adults who maintain traditional eating patterns. Another important observation is how little variety exists from day to day. While this may sound limiting, it allows the body to adapt efficiently. Digestive enzymes, gut bacteria, and hormonal responses remain stable when meals follow a consistent structure. This stability is especially important for aging after 50, when recovery slows and the margin for error becomes smaller. Rather than relying on willpower or complex planning, the Okinawa Plate removes decision fatigue by keeping meals simple and familiar. At this point, it may be useful to pause and reflect on your own routine. How often do your meals change dramatically from one day to the next? Do you notice differences in how you feel when your eating schedule is consistent versus irregular? These observations can be valuable, and many people find it helpful to share what they've noticed about their own food habits and energy levels. As Japanese medicine has emphasized for decades, prevention works best when it is quiet and uneventful. There is no need for extreme restriction or constant adjustment. The Okinawa Plate supports healthy aging precisely because it does not demand attention once it becomes routine. If this approach aligns with how you prefer to think about food and disease prevention, you may naturally find yourself paying closer attention to how your own meals are structured. In the next part, we will begin examining the first key food on the Okinawa Plate, including how it affects blood sugar, inflammation, and muscle preservation, and why it appears so consistently in the diets of Okinawan elders. Okinawa became a focus of medical research because its aging population did not follow the patterns commonly seen in other developed regions. When Japanese researchers began comparing health outcomes across prefectures, Okinawa stood out consistently. Rates of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, and age-related cognitive decline were significantly lower, even among people in their late 80s and 90s. What made this especially relevant from a medical perspective was that these outcomes persisted over decades, not just in isolated cases. This suggested a population-level protective factor rather than individual luck or rare genetics. At first, genetics were considered as a possible explanation. However, when Okinawans migrated to mainland Japan or to Western countries and adopted different eating habits, their disease rates gradually aligned with those of their new environment. This shift occurred within 1 or 2 generations, which is far too fast to be explained by genetic change. From a medical standpoint, this strongly indicated that daily choices, particularly food-related decisions, were driving the long-term effect. The focus then shifted away from ancestry and toward routine behaviors repeated consistently over a lifetime. What researchers found was striking in its simplicity. Across different villages and economic backgrounds, elders were eating nearly the same type of meals, prepared in similar ways, with similar portion sizes. There was no significant difference between what wealthier families ate and what lower-income households prepared. This eliminated access or privilege as the primary factor and pointed directly to consistency. The Okinawan diet was not diverse in the modern sense, but it was stable. Meals were built around familiar ingredients, eaten at regular times, and rarely disrupted by processed foods or excessive calories. Now I want to go deeper into this, because the idea of routine is central to understanding why Okinawa became a longevity hotspot. From a biological perspective, the human body adapts to patterns. When food intake is predictable, the endocrine system, digestive enzymes, and gut microbiota can function more efficiently. Blood sugar regulation improves when meals follow a similar structure day after day. This reduces metabolic strain, especially important after age 50, when recovery slows and the margin for error becomes smaller. In contrast, highly variable diets common in Western countries create repeated spikes in glucose and insulin, increasing long-term risk for chronic disease. Another important factor was portion control without restriction. Okinawan elders were not dieting, but they were also not overeating. Energy intake matched daily activity, which helped maintain muscle mass while preventing excess fat accumulation. From a prevention standpoint, this balance protects cardiovascular health and reduces inflammatory burden. Chronic inflammation is a known contributor to aging-related diseases, including arthritis, heart disease, and cognitive decline. By keeping meals modest and consistent, Okinawan elders minimized this risk over time. The daily rhythm of eating also mattered. Meals were typically consumed earlier in the day, with lighter evening intake. This aligns with circadian biology, supporting better insulin sensitivity and cellular repair overnight. While this pattern was not followed consciously for health reasons, its long-term impact became evident in population data. When combined with regular physical movement and stable social routines, the food pattern reinforced metabolic resilience rather than stressing it. For viewers over 50, the relevance lies in understanding that longevity in Okinawa was not built on rare interventions or complex planning. It was built on decisions repeated daily, often without much variation. Prevention here was passive rather than reactive. Instead of correcting problems after they appeared, the food pattern reduced the likelihood of those problems developing in the first place. This is why researchers continue to reference Okinawa when discussing healthy aging and disease prevention. Comment: this makes sense to me. One of the most consistent features observed in traditional Okinawan meals is that vegetables occupy the largest portion of the plate. This was not a deliberate strategy designed around modern nutrition science, but a practical habit shaped by availability, tradition, and long-term observation of what sustained health. In many meals, roughly half of the total volume came from vegetables, particularly those that are fibrous, bitter, or low in starch. Common examples include goya, known as bittermelon, a variety of leafy greens, cabbage, daikon radish, and several types of sea vegetables. From a medical perspective, this pattern has a direct and measurable impact on how the body processes food, especially in older adults. Now I want to go deeper into this, because vegetables play a foundational role in regulating metabolism as we age. Fibrous vegetables slow the rate at which food leaves the stomach and enters the small intestine. This slower digestion reduces rapid increases in blood glucose after meals. For adults over 50, this matters because glucose spikes place additional demand on insulin production. Over time, repeated spikes contribute to insulin resistance, which is a key driver of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. By filling the plate with vegetables first, Okinawan elders naturally reduced this metabolic stress without needing to measure or restrict calories. Bitter vegetables such as goya are particularly interesting from a biological standpoint. Bitter compounds stimulate digestive enzymes and improve insulin sensitivity. Studies on bitter melon have shown its potential to support glucose regulation by enhancing how cells respond to insulin. While Okinawan elders were not consuming these foods for their biochemical properties, the long-term effect of including them regularly was improved metabolic stability. This stability becomes increasingly important after 60, when hormonal regulation is less flexible and recovery from dietary stress is slower. Another important effect of vegetable-heavy meals is their influence on gut health. Fibrous vegetables act as prebiotics, feeding beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids. These compounds help reduce systemic inflammation and support the immune system. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the strongest predictors of age-related disease, including arthritis, heart disease, and cognitive decline. By consistently consuming a high volume of vegetables, Okinawan elders maintained a gut environment that favored anti-inflammatory signaling rather than inflammatory responses. Vegetables also contribute to nutrient density without excessive energy intake. Leafy greens, cabbage, and sea vegetables provide vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that support cellular repair and vascular health. Sea vegetables, in particular, supply iodine and trace minerals that support thyroid function, which plays a role in energy regulation and metabolic rate. When these nutrients are consumed regularly in moderate amounts, they support long-term physiological balance rather than creating short-term stimulation. From a practical standpoint, the order in which food is eaten also matters. Okinawan meals typically began with vegetables, either as part of a soup, stir-fry, or simple side dish. Eating vegetables first further slows glucose absorption from the rest of the meal. For viewers aged 50 and older, this is a simple adjustment that can have a meaningful impact on blood sugar control without changing total food intake. It reflects a preventive approach based on structure rather than restriction. Consistency is what amplifies the long-term effect. Eating vegetables occasionally does not produce the same outcome as placing them at the center of nearly every meal. Okinawan elders made this choice daily, often without variation. Over decades, these daily choices reduced cumulative metabolic strain and supported healthy aging. This is why modern research continues to emphasize vegetable intake as a cornerstone of disease prevention rather than an optional addition. Comment: I'm starting with one change. For many decades, the primary source of dietary energy in Okinawa was the purple sweet potato. This choice was not based on nutritional trends or scientific theory, but on availability and practicality. Rice was less common historically, and wheat-based foods were not a staple. As a result, the purple sweet potato became the dominant carbohydrate consumed daily by Okinawan elders. From a medical perspective, this single decision had a measurable long-term impact on metabolic health, particularly as people aged. Now I want to go deeper into this, because the type of carbohydrate consumed matters more than the total amount, especially after age 50. Purple sweet potatoes digest slowly due to their fiber content and complex carbohydrate structure. This slow digestion leads to a gradual release of glucose into the bloodstream rather than a rapid spike. Stable glucose levels reduce the demand placed on the pancreas to produce insulin. Over time, this lowers the risk of insulin resistance, which is closely linked to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and accelerated aging. In contrast, refined carbohydrates such as white bread, pastries, and many processed grains are absorbed quickly. They cause sharp increases in blood sugar followed by rapid declines. These fluctuations increase oxidative stress in the body and promote inflammation. For older adults, repeated exposure to this pattern contributes to vascular damage and metabolic instability. By relying on purple sweet potatoes as a primary energy source, Okinawan elders avoided these repeated glucose swings without needing to restrict food intake. Purple sweet potatoes also provide potassium, an essential mineral that supports blood pressure regulation and proper muscle function. Adequate potassium intake helps counterbalance sodium and supports vascular elasticity. This is particularly relevant for aging populations, as blood vessels naturally stiffen over time. Maintaining vascular flexibility reduces strain on the heart and improves circulation to the brain, supporting cognitive health. Another important characteristic of purple sweet potatoes is their antioxidant content, particularly anthocyanins, which give them their distinctive color. These compounds help neutralize free radicals generated during normal metabolism. Oxidative stress accumulates with age and contributes to cellular damage in organs such as the brain and pancreas. While antioxidants alone do not prevent aging, consistent intake through whole foods contributes to a lower inflammatory burden over the long term. The key factor here is not supplementation, but daily exposure through a familiar food. From a digestive standpoint, purple sweet potatoes are also gentle on the gut. Their fiber content supports regular bowel function and feeds beneficial gut bacteria. A healthy gut microbiome plays a role in immune regulation and inflammation control. For adults over 50, maintaining gut health becomes increasingly important, as digestive efficiency declines and inflammatory responses become more pronounced. The daily inclusion of a slow-digesting root helped support this balance without complexity. Portion size also mattered. Okinawan elders did not consume large quantities of sweet potatoes in isolation. They were eaten alongside vegetables and modest amounts of protein, further slowing glucose absorption. This combination created a stable post-meal metabolic response. From a prevention standpoint, this reduced cumulative stress on metabolic systems that are already more vulnerable later in life. The long-term effect of these daily choices is visible in population data. Lower rates of diabetes and vascular disease among older Okinawans correlate strongly with this carbohydrate pattern. When dietary habits shifted toward refined grains and processed foods, these protective effects diminished. This reinforces the idea that consistency, not novelty, drives long-term outcomes. For viewers considering practical changes, replacing refined carbohydrates with slow-digesting roots a few times per week can meaningfully reduce glucose variability. This is not about elimination, but about selecting energy sources that place less strain on the body over time. Small adjustments made consistently have a greater impact than short-term dietary overhauls. Comment: this makes sense to me. Protein intake in Okinawa followed a pattern that contrasts sharply with modern high-protein dietary trends. Rather than centering meals around large portions of meat, Okinawan elders consumed protein in small, deliberate amounts, distributed consistently across the day. The primary sources were tofu, miso, various legumes, and occasional servings of fish. From a medical standpoint, this approach provided sufficient amino acids to maintain muscle and basic physiological function without placing excessive demand on metabolic systems that become more sensitive with age. Now I want to go deeper into this, because protein needs change significantly after age 50, and excess intake can create unintended consequences. Protein is essential for preserving muscle mass, supporting immune function, and maintaining enzymes and hormones. However, consuming protein far beyond functional needs activates growth-related pathways such as mTOR and IGF-1. While these pathways are important earlier in life, chronic overstimulation later in life has been associated with accelerated aging processes and increased risk of certain chronic diseases. Okinawan elders naturally avoided this overstimulation by keeping protein intake moderate and consistent. Plant-based proteins such as tofu and legumes formed the backbone of daily intake. These foods provide amino acids in a slower digesting form, often accompanied by fiber and micronutrients. This slows absorption and reduces metabolic stress compared to large portions of animal protein. Miso, a fermented soy product, also contributed protein while supporting gut health through beneficial bacteria and bioactive compounds. Fermentation improves digestibility, which is particularly important for older adults whose digestive efficiency may be reduced. Fish was consumed in small quantities rather than as a primary calorie source. This provided high-quality protein along with omega-3 fatty acids, which support cardiovascular health and help regulate inflammation. Importantly, fish intake was occasional and portion-controlled. This avoided excessive protein load while still supplying essential nutrients needed for muscle maintenance and neural function. From a prevention perspective, this balance supported physical strength without increasing long-term metabolic strain. Kidney function is another important consideration as people age. High-protein diets increase nitrogen waste, which must be filtered by the kidneys. While healthy kidneys can adapt in younger individuals, aging kidneys have less reserve capacity. Lower but adequate protein intake reduces this workload over decades. Okinawan elders benefited from this reduced strain, which may partially explain lower rates of age-related renal decline observed in longevity studies. Muscle preservation in Okinawa was not achieved through high-protein intake alone. It was supported by regular physical movement, adequate energy intake, and consistent nutrition. Protein was used to support function, not growth. This distinction is important for viewers over 50, many of whom are encouraged to dramatically increase protein without considering overall metabolic impact. Okinawan data suggests that maintaining muscle does not require excess, but rather steady intake aligned with daily activity. Another factor is distribution. Protein was spread across meals instead of concentrated in one large serving. This improves amino acid utilization and reduces post-meal metabolic burden. Smaller, repeated doses align better with the body's ability to synthesize and repair tissue, especially later in life. This pattern also supports stable blood sugar and reduces digestive stress. The long-term effect of these daily choices becomes clear when looking at population health outcomes. Okinawan elders maintained functional strength, mobility, and independence well into advanced age without relying on protein-heavy diets. When dietary patterns shifted toward larger meat portions and processed protein products, these benefits diminished. This reinforces the importance of consistency and moderation over intensity. For practical application, the key principle is to view protein as a tool for maintenance rather than excess. Selecting modest portions from varied sources and integrating them into balanced meals supports long-term health more effectively than maximizing intake. Over time, this approach reduces cumulative metabolic stress while preserving essential function. Comment: This makes sense to me. Fat intake in Okinawa followed a pattern that prioritized quality and moderation rather than quantity. Meals did not rely on heavy animal fats such as butter, cream, or large amounts of fatty meat. Instead, fats came mainly from small portions of fish, sesame seeds or sesame oil, and soy-based foods. From a medical perspective, this choice influenced inflammation, vascular health, and cellular function over the long term, particularly as people aged. Now I want to go deeper into this because the type of fat consumed has a direct impact on how cells behave. Cell membranes are largely composed of fatty acids, and their composition affects how cells respond to insulin, inflammatory signals, and oxidative stress. Fats from fish provide omega-3 fatty acids, which are known to reduce pro-inflammatory signaling pathways. This helps lower chronic, low-grade inflammation, a major contributor to arthritis, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline after age 60. Sesame-based fats also played an important role. Sesame seeds and sesame oil contain compounds such as sesamin, which have been shown to support antioxidant activity and lipid metabolism. When consumed in small amounts as part of regular meals, these fats help maintain favorable cholesterol profiles without increasing overall caloric load. This is important because excessive fat intake, even from healthier sources, can still contribute to weight gain and metabolic stress if consumed in large quantities. Soy-based fats, naturally present in foods like tofu and miso, contributed additional polyunsaturated fats while remaining low in saturated fat. Saturated fats, when consumed in excess, are associated with increased inflammatory markers and impaired endothelial function. By keeping saturated fat intake low, Okinawan elders reduced strain on blood vessels and supported long-term cardiovascular health. This effect becomes more significant with age, as blood vessels naturally lose elasticity and become more sensitive to inflammatory damage. Another key factor was how fats were used in cooking. Okinawan meals typically used fats sparingly, more as a flavor component than a primary energy source. Foods were often simmered, steamed, or lightly stir-fried rather than deep-fried. This limited the formation of oxidized fats, which can increase oxidative stress in the body. For older adults, reducing exposure to oxidized lipids helps protect vascular tissue and supports cognitive health. The balance between fats and other macronutrients also mattered. Fats were consumed alongside vegetables, slow-digesting carbohydrates, and modest protein portions. This combination slowed digestion and promoted stable post-meal metabolic responses. Large, high-fat meals common in Western diets can impair insulin sensitivity and increase post-meal inflammation. Okinawan meal structure avoided this pattern by distributing fats evenly and keeping total intake modest. From a prevention standpoint, chronic inflammation is one of the strongest predictors of age-related disease. Unlike acute inflammation, which is part of normal immune defense, chronic inflammation quietly damages tissues over time. Joint degeneration, arterial plaque formation, and neuroinflammation all progress more rapidly in an inflammatory environment. By consistently choosing fats that reduce inflammatory signaling, Okinawan elders lowered cumulative damage across decades. For viewers over 50, the practical relevance lies in understanding that fat intake does not need to be eliminated or maximized. The goal is to select fats that support cellular health while avoiding excess. Small amounts of high-quality fats integrated into balanced meals create a more favorable internal environment than large portions consumed in isolation. This approach aligns with long-term metabolic stability rather than short-term dietary trends. The long-term effect of these daily decisions is reflected in population data showing lower rates of inflammatory diseases among older Okinawans. When dietary patterns shifted toward higher saturated fat intake and processed oils, markers of inflammation increased. This reinforces the importance of consistency and restraint. Quality fats, used deliberately and in small amounts, support aging bodies more effectively than high-fat approaches that overlook cumulative impact. Comment: this makes sense to me. One of the most distinctive and consistently observed habits among Okinawan elders is known as hara hachibu, the practice of eating until roughly 80% full. This was not framed as a health rule or a conscious restriction, but as a normal stopping point learned early in life and repeated daily. From a medical perspective, this single habit has a significant impact on metabolism, digestion, and long-term disease prevention, especially as the body becomes less resilient with age. Now I want to go deeper into this, because portion control without calorie counting addresses one of the main drivers of chronic disease in Western populations: persistent overconsumption. When meals regularly exceed the body's immediate energy needs, blood glucose rises higher and remains elevated longer after eating. This forces the pancreas to release larger amounts of insulin, increasing metabolic stress. Over years and decades, this pattern contributes to insulin resistance, weight gain, and cardiovascular strain. By stopping short of full satiety, Okinawan elders naturally limited this process without tracking numbers or following diets. Eating to about 80% full also reduces digestive workload. Large meals require more gastric acid, more enzymatic activity, and longer processing time. In older adults, digestive efficiency declines, and heavy meals can lead to discomfort, reflux, and impaired nutrient absorption. Smaller portions allow digestion to proceed more smoothly, reducing stress on the gastrointestinal system. This supports better nutrient utilization and lowers post-meal fatigue, which is commonly reported after large, calorie-dense meals. Another important effect of hara hachibu is its influence on body weight regulation. Okinawan elders maintain stable body weight across adulthood without intentional dieting. From a biological standpoint, consistently stopping before fullness prevents chronic positive energy balance, where excess calories are stored as fat. Maintaining a healthy weight reduces inflammation and lowers the risk of conditions such as hypertension, joint degeneration, and fatty liver disease. These benefits accumulate gradually and become more pronounced after age 60. This habit also supports cardiovascular health. Large meals increase post-meal triglycerides and place temporary strain on blood vessels. Repeated exposure to this state contributes to endothelial dysfunction, a precursor to atherosclerosis. By eating smaller portions, Okinawan elders minimized these post-meal stress responses. Over time, this helped preserve vascular flexibility and reduce long-term cardiovascular risk. Importantly, hara hachibu works in combination with the types of foods consumed. Meals rich in vegetables, slow-digesting carbohydrates, and modest protein naturally promote satiety before excessive calorie intake occurs. This makes stopping at 80% full easier to achieve without hunger or deprivation. The habit is reinforced by food structure rather than willpower. For adults over 50, this is especially relevant, as appetite signaling can become less reliable and external cues often drive eating behavior. The consistency of this practice is what gives it long-term effect. Practicing portion control occasionally does not produce the same outcome as applying it to nearly every meal for decades. Okinawan elders made this decision daily, often without conscious effort. Over time, these small decisions reduced cumulative metabolic strain and supported stable insulin sensitivity. This stability is a key factor in healthy aging and disease prevention. From a practical standpoint, the principle is straightforward. Stop eating when hunger is satisfied, not when the plate is empty. This requires slowing down during meals and paying attention to internal cues rather than external ones. For many people, especially in environments where large portions are normalized, this adjustment can significantly reduce calorie intake without changing food choices. The long-term effect of hara hachibu is evident in population data showing lower rates of obesity-related disease among older Okinawans. When eating patterns shifted toward larger portions and constant snacking, these protective effects diminished. This reinforces the idea that portion control, applied consistently and without rigidity, plays a central role in maintaining metabolic health as we age. Comment: this makes sense to me. Meal timing played a quiet but consistent role in the long-term health observed among Okinawan elders. Meals were eaten at regular times each day, and the final meal was typically consumed earlier in the evening compared to modern Western habits. Late-night eating was uncommon, not because of dietary rules, but because daily routines were structured around daylight hours, physical activity, and rest. From a medical perspective, this regularity had a meaningful impact on metabolic regulation, hormonal balance, and cellular repair, particularly as people aged. Now I want to go deeper into this, because the timing of food intake influences how the body allocates energy between digestion, storage, and repair. Human physiology follows circadian rhythms that regulate hormone release, insulin sensitivity, and cellular maintenance. During daylight hours, the body is better equipped to process glucose and handle nutrient intake efficiently. As evening approaches, insulin sensitivity naturally declines, and the body begins shifting toward repair and recovery processes. Eating large meals late at night disrupts this transition and forces the body to prioritize digestion when it should be entering a restorative state. For older adults, this disruption carries greater consequences. With age, metabolic flexibility decreases, meaning the body becomes less able to adapt to irregular patterns. Late-night meals tend to produce higher and more prolonged blood sugar levels, increasing insulin demand and promoting fat storage. Over time, this pattern contributes to insulin resistance and weight gain. Okinawan elders avoided this stress by aligning their eating schedule with their natural biological rhythm, allowing glucose levels to normalize before sleep. Another important factor is sleep quality. Heavy or late meals increase digestive activity during the night, which can interfere with deep sleep. Poor sleep quality is linked to higher inflammatory markers, impaired glucose regulation, and increased cardiovascular risk. By finishing meals earlier, Okinawan elders supported more stable sleep patterns, which in turn reinforced metabolic health. This creates a reinforcing cycle where proper timing supports rest, and rest supports metabolic regulation. Cellular repair processes also become more active during fasting periods overnight. Autophagy, the process by which cells remove damaged components, is enhanced when insulin levels are low. Eating late shortens this fasting window and delays the onset of repair mechanisms. While Okinawan elders were not consciously fasting, their early evening meals naturally extended the overnight period without food. Over decades, this pattern supported cellular maintenance and reduced cumulative damage associated with aging. Consistency again played a central role. Meals were not skipped randomly or eaten at unpredictable times. Breakfast, midday meals, and evening meals followed a predictable schedule. This regularity allowed hormonal systems to operate efficiently, reducing physiological stress. In contrast, irregular eating patterns common in Western lifestyles create repeated hormonal disruptions, which can accelerate metabolic decline after age 50. The type of foods consumed at dinner also mattered. Evening meals were typically lighter and lower in total energy than midday meals. This reduced post-meal glucose and lipid levels during the night, minimizing vascular and metabolic strain. For older adults, this approach supports cardiovascular health and reduces nighttime digestive burden. It also lowers the likelihood of acid reflux and discomfort, which are more common with age. From a prevention standpoint, aligning meal timing with circadian rhythms is a low-effort adjustment with significant long-term effect. It does not require changing food choices or restricting intake, only shifting when meals occur. For many people, avoiding heavy meals late at night can improve morning energy levels, blood sugar control, and sleep quality within a relatively short period. Over time, these benefits accumulate and contribute to healthier aging. The long-term impact of these daily decisions is reflected in lower rates of metabolic disease among Okinawan elders. When eating schedules became more irregular and late-night snacking increased, health outcomes declined. This reinforces the importance of timing as a foundational aspect of dietary habits. Regular meals consumed earlier in the day support the body's natural rhythms and reduce cumulative stress on metabolic systems. Comment: I'm starting with one change. When you look at the Okinawa Plate as a whole, its effectiveness comes from how closely it aligns with basic human physiology, especially as the body ages. The structure is simple, the ingredients are familiar, and the decisions required are minimal. There is no reliance on rare foods, supplements, or complex planning. What matters is the balance and the consistency with which that balance is applied. From a medical perspective, this reduces cumulative metabolic stress and support systems that naturally weaken over time, such as glucose regulation, muscle maintenance, vascular function, and inflammatory control. Now I want to go deeper into this because simplicity is often underestimated in preventive health. Many people assume that improving health after 50 requires major interventions or strict dietary rules. In reality, long-term outcomes are shaped by small daily choices repeated over decades. The Okinawa Plate works precisely because it is repeatable. Meals are built the same way most days, portions remain moderate, and eating patterns follow a predictable rhythm. This allows the body to operate in a stable environment rather than constantly adapting to extremes. Another important point is that this approach is flexible across cultures. You do not need traditional Japanese ingredients to apply the same principles. Vegetables can come from local sources, carbohydrates can be chosen based on slow digestion rather than refinement, protein can be adjusted to functional needs, and fats can be selected for quality rather than quantity. What matters is the structure of the plate, not its cultural label. This makes the Okinawa Plate relevant for adults in the United States who are focused on healthy aging and disease prevention. From a biological standpoint, the impact of this pattern becomes clearer with age. After 50, the body's ability to recover from metabolic stress declines. Blood sugar spikes last longer, inflammation resolves more slowly, and excess calories are stored more readily. A dietary pattern that minimizes these stresses supports long-term effect rather than short-term results. The Okinawa Plate does this quietly, without forcing the body into constant cycles of excess and correction. Prevention is another central element. Instead of responding to disease once it appears, this approach lowers the likelihood of disease developing in the first place. Stable glucose levels reduce the risk of diabetes. Moderate protein intake supports muscle without overstimulation. Healthy fats lower inflammatory signaling, and regular meal timing supports hormonal balance. If you've stayed through the full explanation, you now have a clear picture of how simple, repeatable food patterns influence health as we age, and why Japanese longevity continues to draw attention from medical researchers. This kind of approach is useful not because it promises quick results, but because it offers practical ways to reduce long-term risk and support healthy aging through everyday decisions. If this type of evidence-based breakdown is helpful to you, subscribing is a way to keep receiving clear explanations about Japanese longevity, food habits, and disease prevention without relying on trends or extremes. You can also leave a comment with the phrase, "I watched till the end," to mark that you followed the full discussion, and a like is simply a way to acknowledge that the information was useful to you. There's a video here that complements this topic and builds on the same principles, so you can continue from there when you're ready.